Howdy, Non at informationhighwayman.com, and you are watching a special website review. I'm doing this review for Alessio at socialmediction.com as part of a second place prize package for the Attention Thievery 101 contest. If you're wondering what Attention Thievery 101 is, I will tell you a little bit more at the end of the screencast. For now, let's dive right in and have a look at his site. Now, my specialty is in conversion rates. I look at a site and I try to find ways to get people to do more stuff there. Now, there are two basic things that I look at when I first arrive on a site. One is very simple and one is much more complex. The first thing is first impressions. The first impressions I have of Social Addiction are not bad. It's an attractive site, but having said that, it feels a little austere. It's lacking in vibrancy. It's got a very kind of muted, dark grey background. The Social Addiction sign is simple, but it lacks a lot of oomph, so it doesn't really draw me in. And the colour palette seems a little bit varied. It seems as if the headlines or titles of the posts should be a similar colour to the Social Addiction masthead at the top. I suspect that they would be too light if they were, but that's the feeling that I get. Possibly a grey would work well as well. Anyway, first impressions out of the way, I don't feel like I should leave the site right away. It doesn't make me want to cut my eyes out or anything like that. So, the second thing that I look at is a checklist which I've developed, which goes through all of the best practices and principles for increasing conversion rates in as simple a way as possible. And the way that I remember it is by the acronym OOD, OOD. Not that kind of OOD, but I'm talking about orientation, objectives, and desirability. Starting on number O, orientation. When a prospect arrives at your site, you need to answer for him very, very quickly, where am I? It's a very simple question, and generally most sites don't do too badly in this regard, because it's not actually that difficult to explain to a prospect where they are. All you need to do is have something like a tagline that says social media and the web made simple. That's very clear. That tells me exactly where I am. It's a blog about social media, and the aim of the blog is to make things simple. That's nice. I don't feel like I'm lost anymore, but navigation is a very big orientation factor for users, and one of the problems that many websites have is they like to brand their navigation. So they'll have things like, if you go to a website about cars, it may have some kind of fancy special trademark names on the navigation, saying things like Chrome and, I don't know, bumper stickers or something, and you go to bumper stickers thinking you're going to find bumper stickers, and it turns out to be something about fender benders or something like that, something completely unrelated. In this case, we haven't got branding per se, but we do have the word Apple here, which is perhaps confusing initially, because I don't think of Apple as being hugely related to social media. And we've also got web, and again, it's not entirely clear how these two things tie together along the navigation. You expect navigation to contain similar elements. So what it could perhaps say is about Apple and about web, or social media and Apple and social media and the web, something like that. But something which is a little more clear would be a good idea. Other than that, everything looks pretty good. The second O is objectives. And when I say objectives, I mean things that you want your users to do. Now, for a social media blog, probably the main thing that you want people to do is to A, read the articles, and then comment. You probably also want them to sign up to receive updates. You may want them to like you on Facebook or tweet your posts, because social proof and viral marketing are always a good thing. So you've got a number of different objectives that you want your users to fulfill, but none of those objectives are remarkably clear on the front page. So as soon as I arrive on the site, I don't feel like there's anything obvious for me to do. Sure, there are lots of links, but there's nothing saying, click here to do this, which tells me you want me to do this, and that's what I should do. It gives me a choice. Should I do this or should I leave? What you really want to do is give users a couple of options that are the most important objectives in terms of what you want them to do, and also give them a few other options which they can fulfill if it will fit on the page without making them confused. The third thing is desirability. It's the D in OOD. And desirability is the big one, because when a user arrives on your site, not only does he need to know where am I and what can I do here, but most importantly, he needs to know why should I do it. If you don't give him any reason, he isn't gonna. He is going to leave instead. So you need to answer the question, why should I do it, as clearly as possible and as immediately as possible. In this case, for example, you haven't got any kind of headline or deck copy which explains to people where they are in terms of what you would like them to do. You're obviously running a blog, and it's obviously about social media, but you haven't given them any reasons to stick around and to interact with the blog instead of just leaving again. So some kind of welcome message saying something along the lines of, this is social media and the web made simple, please do feel free to stick around and read our articles and post comments and so on, gives readers an idea of what you'd like them to do. And the other thing that might be a really good idea is to offer featured articles and popular articles rather than just recent posts, because featured and popular articles are obviously more interesting just because they're called featured and popular articles. Also, the fact that an article is popular indicates that it's addressing some kind of thing that a lot of people want to know, so you're very likely to get a good response from it. So having some kind of system like that in place allows you to draw people in, rather than if they see the path limits you to 50 friends is much less maintenance than Facebook headline, they don't think much of that because they're not interested in path or don't know what it is, and they don't bother scrolling, so they don't see anything else. Or even if they do scroll, they might see, Jimmy Kimmel declares November, blah blah blah, that doesn't sound interesting, I don't know who that is, ANC Youth League, that has nothing to do with me, and so they go away because they haven't got anything to keep their attention. Whereas if you had a featured articles list on the right-hand side, say, instead of a related posts, you might find that people have a look in there as well as just through the main page, and end up spending a lot more time on the site because they see things that are more interesting to them. The other thing to be aware of is the use of images in your copy. You want to be sure that all of the images that you use are very clear in terms of expressing desirability or generating desirability to your prospects. This image here, for example, it demonstrates what you're talking about, but it's not shockingly clear what exactly it is, because someone who isn't familiar with path isn't going to have much of a context in which to put it. So what I would suggest is possibly to use the path logo to just generate a little bit of extra visual interest, but to actually leave the image until the main article when they click on more, and then have a little bit more explanatory text before they get into the article. You might find that way that people are more likely to click through to articles rather than looking at the picture and thinking, I don't know what that is, so I'm going to move on. Pictures and images and even videos can smother your copy by overwhelming them because of the visual interest that they generate. They're very visually dominant, but at the same time, if they don't mean anything to prospects, you're going to find that they actually undermine your copy and undermine the objectives of your site rather than working to promote them. A good example of an image that's used well is this one here, where you've got an actual screenshot of what Julius S. Malema has said, we call for the closure of Twitter, etc. That's an excellent one. Another thing to bear in mind is iPath. People read from the top left to the bottom right and from left to right. Now, what you've got here is perfectly good in that regard, but you have a lot of items on the right-hand side which seem to compete with the left-hand side because they're visually very similar. If you change the About Me and Recent Posts headings, you'd probably find setting them in a grey or setting them in a different font would help them to compete less with the left-hand side, and in theory, they would be less of a visual distraction in that way. I would also suggest that tag clouds are not terribly helpful. Categories maybe. Tag clouds tend to just be visually confusing rather than actually giving people what they really want. I mean, for example, obviously the site is about social media, so it seems as if clicking on social media isn't going to give me a great deal of useful information because pretty much everything is going to be under social media. It's not going to narrow things down for me very much. The other thing to consider with iPath is that having a large number of headings like this, not headlines, but headings, and then following them with lists is quite visually daunting to look at. You've got a lot of text which is difficult to scan because it's got so many scannable elements, which is kind of ironic. I suspect that if you, again, take these related posts headings and set them in a different font, make them a little bit smaller, make them a little less obtrusive, you'd probably find the text actually looked a lot more inviting. However, having said that, keeping the list of links here down to 5, that's a good thing. You don't want to have too many, otherwise it will become too full, too busy to look at. The last thing to consider is legibility. And legibility is something which most sites suffer from in some regard or another. Often it's because they've got their text set white on black or light on dark, which is very, very difficult to read for many people. Sometimes, or usually, it's because they've got their text set too small. In this case, your body copy text is set to 13 pixels, which is, I would say, about 3 pixels too small for the average user online, and probably more like 1 or 2 pixels too small for the sorts of audience that you're likely to be looking at. I'm guessing that you're looking at prospects who are younger and who are more comfortable with smaller text online because they think it looks better, whereas older people, like 40-year-olds and over, will very often have trouble with any text which is below 16 pixels. Having said that, I know for a fact that there are a heck of a lot of people over 40 using social media, so I wouldn't want to make any assumptions. That might be something you want to think about. One last thing that I would say before wrapping up is your RSS and Facebook and Twitter icons at the top. If those are major items which you want people to have a look at on your site, if you're wanting people to actually sign up or to tweet you or friend you on Facebook, you want to make those a lot more obvious, and you want to include not just the icons but actual copy which says something to the effect of please friend me on Facebook or subscribe to the RSS to get more free articles, something like that. So you want to actually call them to action rather than just putting the button in front of them and hoping that it will do the job. Okay, I'm going to wrap up because I don't want this to go too long, but I hope this has been useful.